The first sign of the end of the world was a lie Elias told himself about progress. The new triple-pane windows in their Garden District home, installed in the blistering summer of 2024, were a marvel of acoustic isolation. As a sound engineer, a man who had built his life and his reputation on the precise calibration of noise, he initially reveled in the clean, controlled silence they afforded him. It was a perfect canvas, but as summer bled into a humid, languid autumn, the silence began to feel less like a canvas and more like a void. He'd sit on his back porch, a sanctuary of cypress and climbing jasmine, listening for the familiar, layered evensong of cicadas and tree frogs, and find only a sterile emptiness. The vibrant, chaotic soundscape of Baton Rouge was being meticulously erased, one insect at a time. "It's the damned windows," he'd said to Clara one evening, swirling the Knob Creek in his tumbler. The ice clinked, a sound that felt unnaturally loud, intrusive. "They've sealed us in. It's too quiet." Clara, her hands sunk deep in the rich soil of her raised herb garden, her face illuminated by the warm, forgiving glow of the porch light, had simply smiled that new, placid smile of hers. It was a recent acquisition, and it didn't quite fit her yet. "I think it's peaceful, Eli. The world's so noisy. It's nice to finally hear yourself think." In hindsight, the signs were all there, a breadcrumb trail leading to the precipice. She was among the first, before the pandemic had a name, before the blood tests and the global panic. She was simply improving. That's how he'd framed it, the low-grade anxieties that had always trailed her like a shadow, a misplaced set of keys triggering a frantic, house-turning search, a constant, exhausting fretting over social engagements and imagined slights, had smoothed out, as if sanded down by some invisible, gentle hand. She'd started humming, a low, resonant, tuneless sound deep in her throat, often while staring out the very windows he blamed for the quiet. When he'd asked what the song was, she'd just look at him with a placid, untroubled gaze, her eyes a little distant, and say, "No song. Just a feeling." His work was the next harbinger. He was mixing the audio for a local indie film, a moody Southern Gothic piece shot in the swamps around St. Francisville. In the dailies, he started picking up a persistent, low-frequency contamination, a clean, pure sine wave that hovered around 40 hertz. It defied logic. It was too clean for a ground loop, too steady for environmental noise. He'd swap out the studio's expensive microphones, check every inch of cable for shielding breaks, and run diagnostics on his entire rig until his eyes burned. The sound remained, a phantom in his machine. He spent 3 days meticulously filtering it out of every scene, cursing the city's aging power grid, never once imagining the noise wasn't in the wires, but in the actors themselves, a silent chorus they were completely unaware they were singing. Then the world caught up. The quiet lies Elias told himself were drowned out by a terrifying, global truth. 15-24. The hum. A dormant retrovirus, researchers theorized, activated by some unknown environmental trigger. It nested in the auditory cortex, its only verifiable symptom a low-frequency hum audible only to the infected. It was a ghost, airborne and insidious. Society, a structure already trembling from political and social fissures, shattered. First came the blood tests, a simple, brutal red line on a cheap plastic strip that cleaved households, workplaces, and friendships. Then came the labels, stark and tribal, hummers and stills. By the spring of 2025, Baton Rouge was a city suffering from a quiet, autoimmune disease. The hummers, who now made up nearly half the population, began a slow, silent secession from the society of the stills. It wasn't a strike or a protest, it was a collective, serene disengagement. They'd walk off jobs in critical infrastructure, the power grids flickered, water pressure dropped, emergency services became unreliable, not with malice, but with an eerie, unified indifference, as if responding to a more important call. The city began to decay, not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet rot. Elias's world shrank to the walls of his soundproofed house. The silence he had once curated was now a suffocating blanket. Every morning was a ritual of self-flagellation. He'd sterilize his fingertip with an alcohol wipe, the scent sharp and clean, and stare at the lancet, a tiny silver bayonet. The sharp prick was followed by a squeeze, a welling ruby of blood offered up to the plastic god of the test strip. He'd watch the fluid saturate the paper, praying for the second red line that would grant him re-entry into Clara's world, that would make him whole again. And every day, the single, lonely blue line of the control would appear, a judgment. Still, healthy, untouched, alone, his neighbor, Frank, a retired history professor and fellow still, became his only real point of contact with the outside world. They'd speak over their shared fence, their voices low, conspiratorial. "They're organizing, you know," Frank had said one afternoon, his eyes scanning the street nervously. He gestured with his chin toward a group of Hummers who were silently clearing debris from a storm drain down the block. "They move like ants. No one in charge, but everyone knows what to do. It's not natural." Elias just nodded, the silence in his own head feeling heavier than ever. His studio became his asylum and his torture chamber. He'd spend sleepless nights surrounded by the tools of his trade, which now felt like instruments of mockery. The listener arrived during one of these sessions. At first, it was just a deepening of the shadows in the corner of the room, but over weeks, it coalesced into a distinct form, a tall, gaunt man in the indistinct silhouette of BRPD riot gear, his face a dark, reflective shield. It never spoke, it just stood there, its helmeted head tilted in that perfect, mocking imitation of a Hummer. It was the embodiment of the new, silent authority that governed his wife and his city. The civil order, already threadbare, disintegrated. The police, their ranks also fractured by the virus, responded to still anxieties with brutal, oppressive force. The deep, gut-punching thrum of their armored Bearcat vehicles' rads became a familiar sound, a state-enforced noise to punish those who lived in a world of silence. A third faction was born from this pressure cooker, the Static Heads. A foul cocktail of methamphetamine, synthetic cannabinoids, and battery acid, the street drug known as static promised what the virus would not. It offered a noisy, jittery, counterfeit hum, a chemical path to salvation that usually ended in psychosis or a morgue. Elias's descent was a spiral staircase into a deep, dark well. He began a new, obsessive project, to translate Clara. He'd place highly sensitive microphones around the living room, recording her soft, continuous humming. He'd sit in his studio, headphones clamped tight, and try to find a pattern, a language in the low, resonant tones. Was it a code, a signal? He layered the tracks, manipulated the pitch, applied every filter he had. The result was just a chorus of low, meaningless tones, the sound of his own hope being crushed. One night, Clara walked in on him, her face a mask of pity. "What are you doing, Eli?" He ripped the headphones off. "I'm trying to understand. What are you saying? What is it telling you?" "It's not telling me anything," she said, her voice soft as velvet. "It's just a feeling of being connected, of peace." She looked at the complex waveforms on his monitor. "You're trying to turn a feeling into a problem to be solved. That's the difference between you and me." That night, he followed her. He knew she was going to one of her meetings. He kept his distance, a ghost in the humid darkness, and watched as she met a group of Hummers in a forgotten, overgrown park near the university lakes. They didn't speak, they stood in a loose circle under the amber glow of a single, flickering park light. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they began to move. It was a slow, synchronized, flowing dance, their bodies swaying in perfect, unspoken unison. It was profoundly unnatural, like watching a school of fish move through the air. And the listener was there, standing under a gnarled live oak at the edge of the clearing, a silent, armored shepherd for his flock. Elias felt a cold dread crystallize in his gut. This wasn't a support group, it was a hive. His journey for supplies became a descent into the city's circles of hell. At the grocery store, he watched a still woman get beaten by a police officer for trying to take more than her allotted 2 cans of beans. He saw a static head convulsing on the sidewalk, a string of drool connecting him to the pavement, while Hummers glided past without a second glance. He was cornered in an alley by a dealer, a boy no older than 20 with the eyes of a terrified animal. "Static, man. One hit, you'll hear the whole damn radio," the boy rasped, his hand trembling. Elias stared at the grimy baggie of crystalline powder. The temptation was a physical thing, a black hole of need opening in his chest. To fill the silence. To hear anything. But he saw the boy's twitching form, the sores on his face. It was the wrong noise. It was a scream, not a song. He shoved past him and ran, the boy's desperate, angry curses chasing him down the street. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. The governor, a Hummer, announced a citywide, indefinite curfew for 8 p.m., for stills only. It was justified as a public safety measure. It was understood as the final wall of the ghetto. That same afternoon, a rumor, potent and venomous, ripped through the still population. A supply of the original, pre-mutation vaccine was being held at Our Lady of the Lake Hospital. It was the spark that ignited the city. Elias felt the roar of the mob build from miles away, a real, physical sound that vibrated through the floorboards of his house. It was the sound of the world ending. A frantic, terrifying clarity seized him. He went to his garage, his movements now precise and ritualistic. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a sound engineer. And he was about to create the mix of his life. He strapped his creation to his chest, a chaotic harness of scavenged speaker magnets, the guts of 3 powerful amplifiers, and a web of live wires connected to a stolen car battery. It was ugly. It was dangerous. It was his voice. He grabbed an old can of red paint and a brush, and walked out the front door into the unfolding apocalypse. The street was a war zone. The air was a choking fog of tear gas and smoke from burning cars. A BRPD Bearcat sat at the intersection, its LRAD sweeping the street with a punishing wave of sound. Riot police, anonymous and terrifying in their gray armor, clashed with a desperate army of stills. Woven through the chaos were the static heads, their manic, unpredictable violence escalating the conflict into a 3-sided slaughter. Elias walked into the heart of it, an island of terrible purpose. He moved with a strange grace, the chaos parting around him. He saw the face of his neighbor, Frank, a terrified still, just before he was clubbed by a police baton. He saw a group of static heads swarm a police officer, their movements jerky and inhuman. He saw, in a second-story window down the street, the serene silhouette of Clara, watching. He climbed onto the hood of a wrecked police cruiser, a conductor taking his podium in the center of the intersection. He was the focal point, the eye of the storm. He dipped the brush into the can of red paint. With a steady hand, he painted a jagged, angry red line across his own chest, a declaration of his own faction of one. Then, he reached down and connected the final wire. It was not AHUM, IT was not a scream. It was the sound of reality tearing. A raw, piercing, electronic vortex of pure feedback erupted from the device on his chest, a sound so violent and absolute it felt like the sky was being ripped open. It was the sound of a microphone placed against a speaker, a sound he had spent his entire professional life trying to eliminate, now amplified to the level of a god's fury. It was the sound of sanity collapsing into a singularity. Every single person in the intersection froze. The police, the stills, even the twitching static heads. All motion ceased, the LRAD sputtered and died, its own weaponized sound utterly defeated. The only thing that moved was the sound wave, a physical blow that shattered windows for blocks and vibrated through the very concrete of the street. Elias threw his head back and laughed, a silent laugh swallowed by the electronic scream tearing from his chest. The listener stood beside him on the hood of the car, its helmeted face turned toward the police line, as if in salute. And as the riot held its breath, Elias felt a strange and terrible sense of peace. He was finally in communion, not with the quiet, but with the loud, violent, breaking heart of it all. Clara, the noise of the stills was a painful, ugly thing. From the front window of her house, Clara watched the chaos roil down the street. It wasn't frightening, not really. It was pathetic. A tantrum of sound, shouting, sirens, the percussive pop of the police weapons. It was all a jarring, chaotic static that tried, and failed, to drown out the beautiful, constant song of the hum. The hum was everything. It was the steady, 40 hertz heartbeat of the world, a note of pure connection that had freed her from the frantic, meaningless noise of her old life. It was the reason she and the others could stand placidly in the face of violence, cocooned in a perfect, shared symphony. The riot was just a brief, discordant passage in a song that was eternal. She felt a profound pity for Elias, trapped out there in the meaningless cacophony, his mind a silent, empty room. She watched him walk out the front door. He looked so small and lost. He walked toward the intersection, and she tracked his progress, a strange, detached curiosity her only emotion. She saw him climb onto the wrecked cruiser. She saw him paint his chest, a desperate, childish gesture. She saw him reach down to the machine strapped to his body. And then it happened. It was not a sound, it was the end of sound. One moment, the glorious, soul-deep thrum of the hum was there, the constant note of her existence. The next, it was gone, snatched away. An absolute, profound, and terrifying void opened up in her senses. The chaotic noise of the riot, the sirens, the shouting, rushed in to fill the vacuum, suddenly loud and sharp and terrifyingly real. For the first time in months, she was alone in her own head. The silence was a physical blow, a sensory amputation that made her gasp and stumble back from the window. Her eyes flew to her husband. He stood on the car, impossibly, the source of this terrible void. His machine wasn't making a sound, it was unmaking one. It was a sonic scalpel, precisely engineered to excise the 40 Hz frequency from the world, a black hole of sound that was swallowing the song. The effect on the street was instantaneous and horrifying. She saw other Hummers, who had been watching from their own porches, clutch their heads and fall to their knees. Their faces, once serene, were now masks of pure agony. Through the window, she could hear their thin, panicked screams, the sound of a choir suddenly and brutally silenced. Then she saw the static heads. Their chaotic, drug-fueled energy focused, their twitching bodies turning in unison toward the source of the sudden void. They weren't worshipping him, they were like iron filings drawn to a terrible magnet, moths to a black flame. He had created a sudden, universal agony, and they were drawn to its epicenter. The police, seeing the tide of the riot turn in this new, incomprehensible way, refocused their lines. Their shouted orders were now horribly clear to her, stripped of the hum's comforting filter. Clara stared, her heart hammering with a terror she hadn't felt since before the virus. She wasn't afraid of the riot anymore. She wasn't afraid of the police. She was looking at her husband, the quiet, gentle man she had once loved, the man who had complained that the world was too quiet, and seeing a monster. Not a man who had gone mad, but a man who had, with terrifying sanity and precision, found a way to weaponize silence. He hadn't joined her world, he had declared war on it and, in a single, screaming moment of silence, he had won.